Item 1, request from the Controller's Office for approval of contracts and leases for various city departments is listed on Exhibit A. Item 2, request from the Controller's Office for approval of intra-departmental and interdepartmental transfers from various city departments as listed on Exhibit B. Item 3, request from the Controller's Office for approval of transfers between projects for capital improvement funds as listed on Exhibit C. Item 4, request from the Deputy Controller, Controller's Office for approval of city mail services to dispose of city mail records per the attached request. Item 5, request from the Director of Airports for approval of Board Bill Number 204. This ordinance authorizes the transfer of $13,727,769 from the Airport Debt Stabilization Fund to the Airport Revenue Fund to make funds available to mitigate rates in fiscal year 2014 to 15. This ordinance contains a severability and emergency clause. Item 6, requests from the Director of Airports for approval of Board Bill Number 206. This ordinance authorizes and directs the Director of Airport and the Comptroller to enter into and execute a 10-year land lease, AL-161, for the east and west substations with Union Electric, DBA, Ameren, Missouri, at Lambert St. Louis International Airport. Item 7, request from the Director of Airports for approval of Board Bill Number 205. This ordinance authorizes and directs the Airport Director of Airports and the Comptroller to enter into and execute a 10-year Wi-Fi and distributed antenna system and operating agreement, AL-263, with Concourse Communications of St. Louis, LLC, at Lambert St. Louis International Airport. Those are the items that are presented for the first time. Do we have any additions, corrections, or deletions? If we have none, I'll entertain a motion for approval.
So moved.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve items 1 through 7 as printed. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. These items 1 through 7 have been unanimously approved. Now, there will be a budget update presentation from our Budget Director, Paul Payne. Paul, the floor is yours.
Speak loudly enough. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the board. Say this. Anyone who wants to. So. All right. Thank you. And one of the things we wanted to talk about is we talked about, first of all, some of the proposals to add funds and trying to find ways to fund additional officers. But what I'd like to do is step back a little bit and update you on where we are in this current fiscal year, because we do have some expenditure issues we need to address.
Is that microphone on? Because if it is, if you speak there, maybe everybody can hear.
Okay. I'm going to be moving back and forth between the screen. That's why I'm walking out. But I also wanted to, so I wanted to update us where we are today with the budget and what the revenue outlook is, what the expenditures are, where our expenditures and revenue outlook is for next year, and then in that context, being able to evaluate the potential for identifying any particular sources for additional police officers. So with that, I have a presentation. Let me just move. It does. Of course. These numbers are a little small, but I'll walk you through them. First of all, this is FY15 here today. And one caveat is that we are only through the month of November, so that's the second month of the second quarter. So it's still a little early in the fiscal year. So what I'm presenting here is basically what we've been tracking year to date and what the trends are.
And for the benefit of those that are here, our fiscal year starts July 1st. So, so fiscal year 2015, which is where we are now, started July 1st, 2014, and it ends on June 30th, 2015.
That's right. So this is the first 5 months of the fiscal year. So you get a trend, but you can also get changes through as the year progresses. On revenues, our major sources, earnings tax, payroll tax, and sales tax, are actually trending a little higher than budget, which is good. I mean, they're primarily almost 40-50% of our general fund revenue. And you can see both the earnings tax is projected about 4.9 million over estimate, payroll slightly 4.8. We also had strong sales tax. Sales tax typically is one of our weakest growth taxes, about 1% per year long term. But the first quarter was somewhat strong, first 2 months. We've seen this before where we had a strong first half and then it retracts in the second half. FY12, we actually saw a 9% increase, only to be followed by a 5% decline the following year. And we'll be following that. But for right now, based on the early going, the trend is positive. Now, offsetting that, we have some other reforms. Primarily on franchise utility tax receipts, both the electric utility tax receipts and telecom tax receipts are declining. Telecom is a continuation from the previous fiscal year. Got that down about $3.4 million in total franchise tax. Departmental receipts are also lagging, and primarily that's going to be in EMS collections. If you remember last year, we had an issue trying to keep up with the collections, and I added this year about 2 months of additional receipts. We've not seen them to be on a pace to catch up with that higher estimate this current fiscal year. And then we got some miscellaneous categories. So all in all, you say, all right, looking at the first 5 months of the year, we're tracking maybe 3.9 million in revenue higher than what was anticipated. So that would be good, except now on the expenditure side, you can see some of our what our expenditure trends are. The police department being the first one. Through the first 5 months, or actually that's the 12th day of the fiscal year, they're on track to overspend about $5 million. Not all of that's related to the extra overtime related to the disturbances and all. Some of that has to do with a fitness benefit, as well as a sergeant's overtime, which was decided recently to be eligible for overtime. But so they're tracking about $5 million over. Fire department is also tracking about $1.7 million over. Their biggest item would be the overtime. They're behind on getting their recruit class in, and we don't expect that until actually June. So they would be. If you remove those two departments from the mix, the rest of the personal services and other city departments are actually tracking under budget, which is a good thing because you need that to offset some of the overspending. The one category, workers' comp. If you remember, we targeted at a 15% reduction. That was probably a bit aggressive. Year to date, they're down about 33%, which is good. And departments are beginning to notice it in their budgets, which is a great thing. When they see it in their budgets, they pay more attention to it, and they can make efforts to reduce it. But right now, I think that reduction we budgeted is probably too aggressive. So I would expect that workers' comp to be overspent this year. Streets division, salt account. That's if you recall, last year we used a lot of salt, and so when we did the budget this year, we added 20,000 tons at $50 a ton, $4 million. Well, because all other cities in the country were doing the same thing, we didn't get it for $50 a ton. We got it for $112 a ton. And you got to have salt. So that was $1.2 million right there just from purchasing of salt for this year. The other major account, transportation is tracking up a little higher. We're not getting as much on the recyclables. The value has gone down. And we were getting some revenue from that. Now it's getting a charge. So it's hitting us on the disposal account. I did want to mention Metro Garage contraction, $600,000. And this is going to be a recurring theme. Our inability to replace the fire equipment and our maintenance costs with Metro continues to go up. Our frontline fire apparatus is about 15 years old now. That was in the proposal of the bond issue, and I think we're going to continue to see that rise unless we actually go out and make new purchases. Fuel, a couple of good positive areas. Corrections, when they're lower census, we expect to spend less in meals because of that, because for the meals account. And fuel costs going down, that also impacts positively on that. The police judgment account, this is a judgment account prior to local control. So cases that were pending prior to local control, That account is $2.4 million in deficit at the current time. The city technically would be on the hook for half of that. The state hasn't paid their share. There's some dispute there. But that carrying that deficit there would be about $1.3 million.
There is a dispute between the city and the Attorney General's office on that issue.
Right. So, but if you add all that up, and again, this is through the first 5 months, you would be tracking expenditures of about $8.6 million over budget, which, if you offset it from the $3.9 million in revenue, would be just under $5 million in deficit. Okay, steps to reduce the deficit. Slow down in hiring non-essential positions and cut down on discretionary expenditures. That would be targeting about $1.4 million. A little bit aggressive, but we've done this in the past where if vacancies come up, you just don't fill them. Elimination of some police department prior year encumbrances. We're sort of going through the book saying, hey, what's been on the books in the prior year? That's the monies that are set aside for purchases that have been there for a while. If they're not purchased, then they're being released. That's about $900,000. And then in addition to that, as I mentioned, we have the sales taxes, which are overperforming. Well, that also is the public safety sales tax, which is a separate fund. We can utilize those revenues, appropriate them to offset some of our costs. Communications division revenues, well, local use tax revenues are also slightly ahead of budget, and we can appropriate those. So taking those steps, you could probably mitigate the projected deficit in the current fiscal year. Again, it's early, but that would be a way of getting there. This would require a supplemental appropriation, which you probably have to do, and before the end, you definitely have to do before the end of the fiscal year. You have a note on the exhibit. If red light camera revenues are ultimately released from ESCO, we could use those funds to fill in some of this gap, and then use some of these other solutions and apply it to next year. All right, that's FY15. So now let's talk about FY16. If you once you take the beginning budget, the general fund budget, $484.4 million, and make some revenue adjustments to it. The 3.9 I discussed earlier. We did have a convention and tourism fund. We used a fund balance from a special fund also, which I had to deduct because that's a one-time arrangement. And then you assume a 1.5% growth rate on the revenue base. That would get you about $494.5 million. So you're just under $500 million, but it's $495. Now let's look at the increases and decreases. In order, police, which is about a third of our general fund revenue, you got pay increases both for this year as well as the increases that we anticipate for next year. That's matrix pay as well as proposed pay plan pay. You've got the health insurance increases for them. That goes up and down. I always assume the 10%. Sometimes it's higher, sometimes it's lower. We don't know those numbers for sure yet, but in the first months of the new year, we will, and those will be refined. Overtime costs, they've been overspending the overtime costs. This number, just for hypothetical reasons, assumes the FY14 level of overtime, not the current year, because this year is uneven year. And then the police retirement fund. That's actually, we expect a slight decline there. That was projected as of last year. I would think you might see a little bit more improvement because of the market performance this year, and if so, we'll incorporate that. Fire department, same sort of adjustments, the pay increases, FY15 and FY16, health insurance, the retirement fund, as well as some of the public safety sales tax. Non-uniform employee pay benefits, you get the pay increase, that's this year's 2% merit. We never budget for it, but what that does is next year, it raises your base. So we put that in the base, so that adds to your budget base for next year. Employee retirement, again, I'm expecting a decline. That was projected last year. That may be a little better when we get the actual results. And then health insurance. Other increases and decreases, we got civil courts and lease debt, which is going away, it's $2.5 million. I've got a $5 million for Justice Center. What that represents is if you remember when we balanced the budget, we use these reallocating funds from capital, from award cap, from rec cap, and all that. that's a mechanism for balancing the budget. What that does is reduces the amount of money the general fund has to pay to the capital fund in order to balance. So in outlining this FY16, you assume no reallocations. That's your starting point. And then you end up where you end up at the end when we actually do the budget. But from a starting point, you really don't want to assume that. You just put the number in, and that would be $5 million there. There's a couple of other ones on the list. You'll see that there's about 5.9 in total that was reallocated this year. The Justice Center, there was a one-time deficit in the gaming fund last year, which we had to budget for. That goes away, so that's actually a positive for FY16. City Council, we have PC, transfer station, when we look like the drug court, that would be assuming the $300,000. It's assuming when we don't do that. If we didn't do that, that would be a $300,000 increase. Any other big ones? Fuel, that's lower prices. Okay, Board of Elections, it's about a $500,000 increase. We have no regularly scheduled elections for next year because it's an off election year. However, we do know because of the earnings tax law, we're going to have that special earnings tax election next in April of 2016. So we got a budget for that.
In 2016.
Yeah, it's a year from this coming in. Let me see. Facilities management, Forest Park utilities for the last several years, $600,000 of utilities under the Forest Park agreement were being absorbed by the Forest Park. That's ending, so we have to pick that up. That was part of that 5.9. I highlighted it. It was the 0.3 to 0.6 that was reallocated revenue. So that's going away in FY16. Utility accounts are still tracking high, so we've adjusted that. Most of that is the steam account, which we've seen our base go up for steam usage. That's how we heat most of our municipal buildings. And then again, ESD, Metro, and that's part of the fire department fleet and the continuing cost associated with maintaining those vehicles. So that produces, if you add up all the increases, that's about 16.4. That gets you a base budget of over 500, which is about a $6 million deficit. So two caveats. One, again, very early. Two, well, maybe that three caveats. Three, when we get the requests in, it always comes in. You're always going to find things that you weren't anticipating that go higher. Let's say forestry comes in with weeds or some request that's going to make this gap higher. But it is better than it's been in recent years. If you remember, we had 20, 30, or $40 million gaps in the recession years. We've been slowly nipping away at it to where it's almost getting to be balanced. Technically, it's balanced, but we're still doing special things to keep it balanced by moving funds to special funds and all. Ideally, what you want is a structurally balanced budget, which recurring revenues meet recurring expenses, and you don't have to move money between funds. We're not there yet, but we're getting close.
I think one of the things I just want to say to those that are here listening and watching is that the budget process, of course, is something that is, there's not real science to it. There's a lot of estimates. I mean, the numbers that we put together for the budget are estimates, and we track them during the year to see how we're doing meeting those estimates. So we have to estimate the revenues that are coming in. We estimate the expenditures that we anticipate, and then as we go through the year, we adjust that because we track it to try to keep our balanced budget. We are required to. We are required to have a balanced budget. We always do have a balanced budget, but as you can see, it takes there's a lot of moving pieces, and we work real hard to address those during the year. So by the end of the year, we've balanced everything that we can move into the next fiscal year.
Thank you, Mayor. All right, so that's FY16. We have the outlook. Now, moving to the discussion about police funding options. To sort of give you the context, so now we're not quite structurally balanced, so it's difficult to work within the existing budget to add something. So it's particularly something expensive such as the police officers. So I've outlined some of the costs here. Entry-level cost of an officer is approaching $60,000 a year in salary and benefits. 160 officers, we were out in the $9 million range. So that's a big ticket item. And so in order to try to identify where we can get funds for that, It's probably going to be a series of piecing together various options. And there is no magic bullet to this. It's just a matter of finding which ones are the most palatable and that we can identify, and which ones are the most secure that we can actually enable if this is something that we're going to be doing. First off, a funding grant that the police have been awarded would fund 15 officers. It's about $1.8 million item. Over 3 years, that would be about $600,000 for the next 3 years. Again, the thing about funding grants is that they expire, so that is one downside to that. But it doesn't last for 3 years. It could fund up to 15 officers for that. I mentioned earlier the red light camera ticket revenue. Simply because it's being paid in escrow now. I don't have it in FY15's budget. It's not been assumed going into that forward. If the courts find favorably for that source of revenue, those funds can be released and reincorporated into the FY16 budget as a funding source. General obligation bond issue, we've talked a lot about this. And what that proposal is a bond issue to address a lot of the city's capital needs. You may have heard a lot about it. We've been talking somewhat the last couple of years. One of the, and I mentioned that the fire department equipment continues to show up in costs on the operating budget side simply because it's now getting older and older. I had a budget meeting with 2 of the judges yesterday, preliminary to go over their budget. They expressed some concerns about the capital in there, how they're going to fit some of those needs into their operating budget, pointing out that there's sections of the civil courts building stonework that's in risk of falling from the building that they're scrambling to try to fund. Those are the kinds of things that have to be addressed. I mean, we cannot continue not to do that. And so I want the supposition here would be if you have some sort of funding mechanism to do that, the general fund would see some relief on the maintenance side. Primarily in the vehicles, but there could also be roof repair and things like that you would see.
So you're talking about if there's a bond issue that's passed and we're able to make these address these needs, whether it's structural from a building standpoint or
right.
rolling stock from a vehicle standpoint,
right.
that it would reduce significantly our maintenance,
our operating. Yeah, I would say that this would be a conservative number. Mostly it's vehicles, but then you've got all sorts of building repairs and things like that. Adjust auto license tax for inflation. The auto license tax used to be that that sticker that used to be in the windows. Now it's part of your property tax, which ranks $8 per car, $10 per truck, and $4 per motorcycle. The only issue with that is that those rates were set in 1986. So you can see that in the last 20, 30 years, the purchasing power has let those rates decline significantly. In fact, using the CPI there, it's about 113% since 1986, and that was using 2013. So if you double those rates from 8 to 16, 10 to 20, and 4 to 8, that would be significant enough to raise about $1.4 million. And again, as a fixed source of revenue, that would have to require a periodic adjustment if it's to keep up with inflation.
And I want to just also say, so it's clear that these proposals, funding options that you're presenting that would require an increasing of these fees or taxes is something that we're not voting on here today. This is a presentation as possible options. If these were to, we were to go forward with these, they would have to be presented in the form of a board bill to the Board of Aldermen and go through the process at the Board of Aldermen. Ultimately, it would have to, if it was going to be on the ballot, approved by the Board of Aldermen, put on my desk, then I would have to sign it for it to go on the ballot and would be voted on by the public. This item and the next 2 items.
That's right. So all of these, as the mayor indicated, would be, at least these next ones would be voter issues, voted for, vote required. And if you remember, the graduate business license, this was established in 1988. And actually, we did this very proposal to adjust it for inflation back in 2006. I don't know if you remember. The graduate business license is a license that's based on the number of employees at a business. So it's a a certain fee that the company will pay, and based on that level of employment. It raises about $10 million a year in total, but has the last adjustment in 2006. If it were adjusted just by inflation since that time, it would be about a 15% increase. And if you did that, then that would be about $1.5 million. Parking garage tax, 5 to 10%. This is something that's been discussed in previous financial review committees before. It's 5% of gross receipts of parking institutions throughout the city. So you've got a parking lot with a ball game, they pay 5% of their gross receipts. This would say instead of 5%, you pay 10%. It brings in about $2.6, $2.7 million per year. By doubling that rate, it generates $2.6 million. Now, I'll point out that residents in apartments and things like that, those are not subject to this tax. This is mostly for transient parking. So when you go in to see an event, you pay to park, there's a gross receipts on the operator, and they pay that. Another item, police pension reform. If you recall, when we talked about the budget a lot, we talked about how much pension costs have eaten away at our ability to meet some of our operating costs. What I've illustrated here is the cost of the city's contribution over the last 5 years to the police pension system. They've risen from $17.5 million to $32.3 million. That's an increase of $15 million. That by in and of itself would be sufficient to pay for 250 officers. Now, the unique thing about police pensions is that it's strictly a structure of the state legislature. The city has no control over this, so they would pass the legislation, and the city just pays the bill. There are things that you can do within the pension systems to garner savings. I mentioned in there that the drop, double dip, and things like that. Nothing that would address the main benefit, the protective benefit, but things on a going forward basis that might be ancillary benefits that could be proposed to address that. But that's, I think that in any discussion regarding operating costs, we are not done with pension reform. That's something that's going to have to stay in our outlooks if we're going to continue to try to balance the budget in the future. And this is just a summary of all the funding options that's laid out, everything from the grant to the pension discussion, as well as the out-of-license fee, general obligation bonds. The application of fund scenarios that shows you the cost of the various level of officers. You start from the 160, and depending on what gets approved or doesn't get approved, or wherever you end up, the total cost. There was also discussion of adding $1.4 million for crime prevention programs and police community training programs. So I added that into the mix to show you what the total would be in the $8 to $10 million plus figure. And you've got about $10 million in options discussed here, not including pensions. So there's a lot of play here, and there's a lot of other options to discuss. And but that's basically what I have for you today.
Okay. Members of E&A, have any questions, comments?
Paul, I just want to say thank you for bringing us up to date with the city's the budget for 2015. And I also wanted to ask you about your comments regarding where we are with the overages thus far. You mentioned we are pretty much ahead in terms of our expenditures thus far in 2015 budget compared to what we would have been.
Yeah, our revenues are coming in slightly ahead of estimates, which is a good thing. I mean, positive. But on our expenditure side, we're tracking over the appropriation, and we can't overspend the budget. So the likelihood is that through a combination of holding positions vacant, cutting out discretionary funds, a supplemental appropriation with any revenue sources that we can identify that are coming in over, and try to cable that together so that we can actually end up balanced at the end of the year.
Okay, that's what I wanted to kind of for you to highlight, because I know that normally we look to those kind of issues like maybe not hiring or holding back spending later on in the year, maybe the third quarter, we're talking, this is kind of the situation we're in second quarter, is that correct?
Yeah, I think you really want to do that because the later you wait, the less impact it has on your bottom line. So you're almost through the half part. You've gone through 12 pays, we're in the 13th pay. So you're only going to get half of an impact. If you say, we're not filling this position, well, it's only worth half of that position through this fiscal year.
Thank you.
Yeah. Paul, I just want to thank you for all your work. I really appreciate it. I know it's tough balancing these numbers and meeting all the demands all the time. And I appreciate your first pass on looking at how we expand public safety. I'll tell you, the thing that I appreciated most about what you gave us yesterday or whatever was you began to look at public safety outside of just the bounds of adding additional officers, because you talked about other programs that we need to shore up, youth programs and services and things of that nature. So I have a couple questions. Do we have an academy going right now?
That I couldn't speak to. I'm not quite sure where they would be in terms of the recruit schedule at the moment.
And then the other thing that I want to ask related to that is, can we get a copy of or an outline of what is included in the academy training? Because if we're looking at better diversity awareness amongst the police department, things of that nature, that seems to me to be a place right up front where we begin to train officers from the onset, how to work within urban communities. I think that we should look at that. I don't know if they have that, and if they do, we should review it.
No, that's stuff we do. I mean, he's a budget guy, but our police department, that's something we're in charge of, and we're doing it. But I wanted you to know that that doesn't come in his jurisdiction.
Oh, okay. All right.
That's my jurisdiction.
All right.
And all of ours, actually.
Yeah.
All of ours.
So I guess the question is, Mr. Mayor, can we look at how we restructure, part of the academy training moving forward to include some of those things, and what would be the cost for doing some of this?
Yeah. No, we're already working on it, and then that's something we've already committed to. We're moving forward with, and and on the recruitment, we've entered into an agreement with the Ethical Society of Police to make sure we recruit more diversity, more African Americans specifically within the police department.
Okay. All right. Other question is.
Yeah. And
I'm just saying I can get you the training.
we'll get you the training information.
Okay. My other question is the number of 160 new officers. I'm assuming that came from the chief based on what he feels like he needs across the city and that kind of stuff. If we can get some more information on how and what his plans were with the 160, I think that'll help. Because one of the things that I would like to see is, as we move forward to addressing our total public safety picture and making sure that everything is funded, at appropriate levels. If we can shift more money to youth programs and services and some of these other things, I think it'll help, because you begin to move more toward the crime prevention side of opposed to the crime response.
Correct. Yep. Yeah. No, those are all good suggestions, and certainly something that we are working on. From the chief's standpoint, I can tell you that the number 160 came from him, and the idea would be to deploy those police officers in the neighborhoods on generally on an even basis to the 6 districts.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. But if we can look at ways of, as we're going through.
Can you speak up, please? Nobody can hear.
Oh, okay.
You're having this entire meeting is public mostly, but then nobody can hear.
Okay, we didn't realize that. Thank you, though, for letting us know. Appreciate it. But we'll talk louder.
Thanks for letting us know. Can somebody turn the mics on? They just turn the mics on.
Are they not even here? Is that better? No?
We'll get the mics turned on, but thanks for letting us know. The other question would be, I am, but I have to, I'm formulating a question, so you'll hear the question once I get it formulated. You know, one of the things that we continue to hear about is the Ferguson effect, right? And I want to make sure that we don't discount the fact that we've had an unseasonably warm winter, right? And some of those things, if we look at our crime statistics throughout the years, we will see that, you know, when we have these unseasonably warm winters and some of these other things come into effect, we see a spike in crime. So I want to make sure that as we're approaching addressing our public safety concerns, our city is not based on what's happened in Ferguson. It's not based on protests or anything like that. It's based on just making sure that we have everything in place so that our youth have things to do during the summers, and that we have more enriched programs available for them, that we have good training programs within our police department, and we have an adequate police force on the streets that are well trained, that work with the citizens and have built relationships with the community so that it's not an antagonistic relationship.
Right. Oh, thank you. No, boy, we're here. Really. All right, it works now. All right. So well, thank you for those comments, Mr. President, and just want to address them quickly. We're not basing our approach to more police funding based on Ferguson or based on any protests. I want to make that very clear. We're basing it on the fact that our crime has been dropping pretty steadily now for 20 years, and specifically within the last 6 years, crime has dropped by about half. And since August, our crime is starting to go up. And we want to make sure we nip it in the bud, because we want to make sure that people in our neighborhoods are protected. And it's not based upon what happened in Ferguson, it's not based on protests, but it is based upon crime statistics that are measurable. And as far as the youth, putting things into crime prevention and youth programs, we've got a youth budget of about $10 million right now on youth services, and we're always trying to find new ways and better ways to do more things in that regard. We know how important that is. After-school programs, early childhood, recreation, all those things that are absolutely essential. So those are, and we're always open to new ideas on how to do more and where to get the resources to do those things as well. And I can tell you from a police standpoint, we've got a professional police department with an outstanding police chief who understands how important it is that we have the very best trained police officers anywhere, and we're always working, and they're always working hard to continue to do that and even to do better. So just want to make sure you know that this is not a reaction to anything. This is an ongoing effort to make sure we have the very best trained police officers, and I believe we do have some of the best trained police officers in the country. That doesn't mean that we can't get better. It doesn't mean we can't keep trying to improve. But I want to make that statement. So, all right. So if there's nothing further, I will entertain a motion for adjournment.
So
moved and seconded. All those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. This meeting is adjourned.